But both sides. We've been discussing a lot about Shabbos issues, about tefillah issues, and I'd like to discuss with you issues that are related to Shabbos and to tefillah that are not necessarily connected to Corona. The first source I want to show you is in Pischei Tshuvos on page 82. And he's talking about a case of a fellow that owns, let's say, a soda machine, a pop machine. People come and they put coins in. And the question is, does he have to close that down on Shabbos? The Shulchan Aruch writes, Muto lifros mitzudas chayav yofos v'dogim ve'im nitzodim b'Shabbos. So you're allowed to set up these traps, and the animals will be trapped on Shabbos. And here too, he's setting it up that he has this machine, which is an automatic machine. It's set up in different locations. He may have many machines, and he has a business. You can talk about laundry machines like this and so forth. And that seems to be straight out of the Shulchan Aruch that it's mutter. The only issue that might come up is if you are making it possible for Jews to violate the Shabbos. And if you turn for a moment to page 83, he does say something about that. And he says that maybe you might be recommended to lock up your machine on Shabbos in order to make sure that Jews don't use it on Shabbos. Or perhaps at the very least, somehow notify the Jews that you don't want them to use it on Shabbos. Maybe that's sufficient. But in any event, as far as benefiting and profiting from sales on Shabbos, in which you are not actively involved in selling anything on Shabbos, it's like a malach that you set up an Erev Shabbos that completes itself on Shabbos, and that's codified by the Shulchan Aruch in the case of Tzeidah, and that's mutter. And therefore he says, back on page 82, on the left column, Ein tzarich linolo b'Shabbos. And this is not called mekach u'memkar. This is not considered as if you're doing business on Shabbos. Just like when you set up the traps on Erev Shabbos, it's not considered as if you were trapping the animal on Shabbos. The Seder took place what we call me'elov. Me'elov means on its own. The animal got trapped. It trapped itself, if you could say it that way. So the person who comes along and pays you by putting money in your machine, he's doing the action and you're not doing the action. Now, in footnote number 8, he writes, Ki mitzad ba'al ha'machshir, the owner of this vending machine, ain't shum maisa kinyan. He's not doing a maisa kinyan. The kinyan is effectuated totally by the kohen. And in the balance of this footnote number 8, which is I think very important, and footnote number 9, those two footnotes, he's going to quote Rabbi Kiveger and the Note of Yehuda. We'll come back to the Note of Yehuda, Mirza Shem B'li Neder, Behem Sheikh Advarim. But first, let's see the last 4 words in this paragraph, the opening paragraph here in the text itself, with footnote number 9, V'lo mishum schar Shabbos, which means that a person should not be making a profit from that which is implemented on Shabbos. Now, although he's not actively doing so, you might argue that it's irrelevant whether he's active or passive. His soda pop is being purchased on Shabbos. The money is being paid to him on Shabbos. It's in his bank account, essentially. And maybe that's considered benefiting financially from a malacha that was done on Shabbos. Again, you didn't do the malacha, but you're benefiting from the malacha. So in order to justify this heter, in the case of the vending machines, and to establish that this is not a violation of Schar Shabbos, he quotes a tshuva in footnote number 9 of the Noda B'Yehuda. And the Noda B'Yehuda makes a fundamental distinction between two categories of Schar Shabbos, one of which is prohibited, and the other was not included in the prohibition of Schar Shabbos. What are these two categories of Schar Shabbos? And once again, if there's anyone who's willing to open up their camera so I can see at least one face, I would be appreciative. But if not, I can say a shir to just to names on a board. It's not a problem. Anyone could do that. I don't know if you ever tried it. Very, very much recommended. It's a really exciting way of saying shir when all you see is names. But okay, I have to thank Yudi over here on my right, or from his perspective on the left, and David here on my left. Oh, here's Bobby, who shows his face. Bunch of people with Sphira Berdeloth. Oh, this is really getting geschmack. Beginning to see Ruben and Joe and everybody. It's really giving me a lot of chizuk. It's waking me up in the middle of the afternoon, which I can use it.
Is it okay if we eat during this year?
Absolutely. Not only could you eat, you could even walk around if you like. I don't mind if you show up in pajamas. I don't think it's Kabbalah Torah, but that's fine. Do whatever you want except for throwing spitballs, because they say that spitballs go through Zoom and it could really hurt somebody. In any event, now that we're all on board together, what's the difference between the following two categories of Schar Shabbos, which is a fundamental breakthrough of the Noda B'Yehuda? The Noda B'Yehuda says that Schar Shabbos has to do with one of two categories. And then there's another schar, which is not Schar Shabbos, and was not included in the Isser. The two cases that were included in the Isser are either number one, Spirus, or number two, Pa'ula. Let's go through these two cases, two categories. We'll start with the latter, we'll go backwards. Pa'ula means that you are paying me for my work. And I cannot get benefit from work that was done on Shabbos. If I'm a Jew and you're a guy and you're paying me for the work that I did on Shabbos, I'm not allowed to get that benefit. That financial benefit is prohibited. And there's a lot of issues here about whether that's called Amir Liakim or it's a separate Isser. We're going to assume it's a separate independent Isser, that even if I could skirt around and circumvent Amir Liakum, it would still be prohibited if he is paying me for my work on Shabbos. That's one category that's prohibited on Shabbos under Schar Shabbos. The second category is Schirus Mamish, which means not that he's paying me for my work, but he's paying me for the use of my house or my apartment. And we signed a rental agreement. Does this mean, therefore, that a rental agreement that includes Shabbos, I mean, I'm not renting it to you from Sunday to Friday, although you could do such a thing on Airbnb, but I'm renting it to you for 6 months, for a year, for 10 years. Why isn't that called Schar Shabbos if you're paying me rental? We'll come back to that question in a minute. But then, says the Noda B'Yehuda, this is his breakthrough, there's another case where you benefit financially on Shabbos, but it's not considered part of the Isur Schar Shabbos. And that's when you have a chefetz misuyam, a physical object, and he is buying or perhaps selling on your behalf at a profit your object. That's called kinyan, and that's not called schirus. When there's kinyan, like for example, in our case of the vending machine, where the financial benefit, the income that the Jew is making, is a result of the fact that the guy is purchasing your object, your soda pop. That's not considered Schar Shabbos. This is the major breakthrough of the Noda B'Yehuda. and almost all the tshuvas that came after the Noda B'Yehuda that allow you to basically buy and sell and make a profit thereof on Shabbos. The kinyan is effectuated on Shabbos. The guy puts a dollar into the machine, and that dollar is in your possession. It's in your rishus. You're the Jew. You own the vending machine, and he does this on Shabbos. The Noda B'Yehuda, since he says that sale, buying and selling, as long as the Jew is not actively involved in the sale, it's only the guy who is implementing the kinyan. That's not called schar Shabbos. A very, how should I say, as always, a Noda B'Yehuda is always a trailblazer. This is a breakthrough tshuva. And again, all these issues about schar Shabbos are so relevant. There are so many cases where you are buying and selling things on Shabbos. You're not actively involved. You have businesses that run on Shabbos, rental, and sometimes you're even paid for something that you do on Shabbos. All this is very contemporary. And it all boils down to this distinction of the Noda B'Yehuda. And is it schirus, which is something in a sense abstract? It's a pu'ula. You're benefiting from living in the apartment. You're benefiting from something I'm doing on your behalf. Or is it kinyan? And therefore, if you take a look at footnote number 9, he writes, in the name of the Noda B'Yehuda, schar eitzim shebemerchatz. This is mamish our vending case, a vending machine. You own a beis hamerchatz, or somebody else owns a beis hamerchatz, and you supply the wood that keeps the fire going in the beis hamerchatz to heat up the water. So you own the eitzim. The guy comes in on Shabbos, and he pays you a fee for the eitzim. You're going to benefit from his payment on Shabbos. It's on Shabbos. He's going into Beis HaMerchatz on Shabbos. What he does on Sunday to Thursday or Friday, I don't care. But when he goes in on Shabbos and he pays you for the wood, you're benefiting financially from Shabbos. Says the Noda B'Yehuda, it's mutter. Why? Because this doesn't come under schar Shabbos. Schar Shabbos means when I give you something abstract, whether it's a pu'ula, whether it's a rental, but if it's an actual kinyan on a be'en, on a physical object, that I could benefit from on Shabbos as long as I'm not involved in the Ma'aseh kinyan. That's the Noda B'Yehuda. And based on that, we can certainly allow a vending machine to go on Shabbos. Again, skirting the issue of, are you causing Jews maybe to use the machine on Shabbos? However, if you'll turn to the other side of this page, I have it in two sides, but if you turn to page 83, we're going to get to the most contemporary issue about the internet and sales over the internet. And the question is whether you're allowed to benefit from sales over the internet on Shabbos, transactions that take place on Shabbos over the net. You'll take a look at the bottom paragraph on the right column. A man owns an internet site. What is the user of that site? So you have, let's call him John Paul Jones, a guy. He's going to use your internet site, your Yankel. And why is he paying you every time he uses your site? Because you are a genius and you know all about finance and you know how to encourage him to either sell or buy Lamazogin stocks, bonds, real estate, all the information. Baruch Hashem, we have a concept called the Yiddish Cup. So you have created a program on the internet using the Yiddish Cup. You're going to charge every person for every time he goes on the internet and uses your site a fee, because he's using your brain in order to decide where he wants to invest his money. There's something similar, by the way, in the medical field. You know, you have certain symptoms and the various possible medications that you could take. You could go on a line on an internet site. You pay to use the information that was collected on that internet site. You press in certain questions, information, and you'll get your answer. Don't even bother going to the physician. Now, somebody is using your site on Shabbos. Obviously, it's not closed down on Shabbos, is it? He says, "Im yesh lo adam atar be'internet asher mesapek meida al sharei chalifin." For example, there's an exchange rate, and you want to know whether the Canadian dollar, is going up or going down. You want to know about gold or silver, is it on its way up, on its way down. You want to know whether to buy or sell. So you use the internet site, and you pay for that. On Shabbos, you're using it when it's owned by Yankel, who's an Orthodox Jew. Okol inyan acher, whatever it is, the knowledge that he gives you when you go into his program and you visit his site. Whatever you know, whatever you heard, whatever you saw, all that you program into the site. You're having a wonderful Shabbos. You're eating 3 meals, you're going to shul, you don't know anything about what's going on to the internet, but somebody out there is paying you on Shabbos to go into your internet. Well, you're totally passive. But wait a second. Is this called schar Shabbos? So let's go through the Nod Yehuda. Nod Yehuda says that if you're selling something abstract, your pu'ula, or you are renting something, that's called schar Shabbos. That's awesome. If, on the other hand, you're selling an object and the kinyan is being effectuated by the guy so that you're actually passive, you're benefiting from a sale or a purchase of your object, that's mutter, says the Nod Yehuda. He says the following. He says, Kevon, this on the left column, Al kol knisal atar, yesh gvia b'tashlum. Since every time somebody uses your site, you collect a fee. Ariyesh bazeh mishum isur netilas schar Shabbos. You are now benefiting from schar Shabbos. Why? Footnote number 16. He quotes Rav Vosner, the hacha leka hetera da Nod Yehuda. In this case, you cannot apply the logic of the Nod Yehuda. Why not? Sharei eno mocher chefetz o motzar. He's not selling any object. The difference between the vending machine case, or in the Nod Yehuda's time, 3 centuries ago, the Eitzim in the Beis HaMerchatz, and the case of schar Shabbos, is because in the case of the Eitzim, you have a be'en. You have a physical object that you are, in a sense, transferring ownership, but you're passive. Is then we have the Nod Yehuda. That's called mechiras chefetz. Mechiras chefetz is okay on Shabbos, says the Nod Yehuda. The radical sheet of the Nod Yehuda. But if he's paying you and you're benefiting, not from a mechiras chefetz, but because you have the knowledge, you have at your fingertips, the expertise, the experience to make these decisions. You've got the wisdom. He's paying you for your wisdom. That's abstract. That's not a be'en. That doesn't come under the heter of the Nod Yehuda. V'dami l'kabola schar Shabbos al schirus dira okelim shu os. Can I rent you my house for Shabbos, and you're going to pay me for use of your house for the schirus? That's already schar Shabbos. He's not buying your house. He doesn't own it. He's paying you for something abstract, for the schus shibush. That's called schar Shabbos. So I come back to my original question. Are you therefore telling me that I can't rent my house to a guy? We'll see about a Jew, but to a guy, because included in that is Shabbos. So here's where, again, you'll ask your local rabbi, you'll ask your doctor who's a rabbi, you get your own psak. I'm just giving you my opinion. Is that okay? Can I do that? Because last week I disagreed with the Rashka Bahag, so I got it over their head because they're whatever. I'm not right now. I'm not interested. You don't have to come to me for your psak. You'll go to your local Clanton Park rabbi. I'm just giving you my take on this. In my humble opinion, it seems to me that Schar Shabbos means that you are billing the person specifically for Shabbos. Otherwise, it's called Havlah. If it's swallowed up in a larger time period, I'm renting this house to you for a year, for a half a year. And amongst that, every week ends with a Saturday. That's not schirus. That's not schar Shabbos. He's paying you for the schirus for the entire year. And therefore, could one possibly argue that if John Paul Jones uses my internet on Shabbos, he's not paying me because I'm charging him for Shabbos. The internet site is available 7 days a week and the entire year. And therefore, the Schar Shabbos here is behavla, it's swallowed up. Does anybody follow me? Okay, who can slug me up?
I have a question.
Oh, a question. Okay, I was hoping you would smash
so
me to the read.
If it's paid per use, then I can see the Schar Shabbos.
Oh.
However, if it's an annual contract for access to the info, then no.
This is, I think, the slug up to my slug up. Right? It's a cash on my cash. In the case of schirus, there's a kinyan on an entire period of time which begins at one point, ends at another point, and inside the bookends, you have Shabbos. That's called Havlah. But if you pay me for every single use, then every single time you go on the internet, you're paying me for that use. The question then becomes the following. When you pay me for that use, is that B'Havlah, or is that relevant to the day itself? Since that use that I'm paying you for, your genius and your experience and so forth, could happen on any day of the year. It just happens to be that, the guy wants to make an investment on Shabbos or so. He wants to get your opinion, Yankel Barrel, through your internet site and enjoy the benefit of your wisdom. Is that related to Shabbos per se because it took place on Shabbos? If I rent you a house on Shabbos, that means that you're paying me for the use of Shabbos. Here, it's absolutely coincidental that it happens to be on Shabbos. So we say no. As David was saying, you're paying for the use on Shabbos. You're going on the internet on Shabbos. I'm getting money and benefiting financially from your use of my knowledge of my pa'ula on Shabbos itself.
And would you?
I would like to. Go ahead, Joe.
No, go ahead, Rob.
I'd like to understand the lumdus of the difference between
Of the
kinyan on Shabbos of an object versus the kinyan of knowledge. Like, in other words, with the internet and today, knowledge really is the new chayfetz. Like in other words, so really, when you're buying knowledge, which is what you're doing on the internet with this thing, it's really a chayfetz. So like, in other words, what's the lumdus of the difference between saying that I'm buying, the Night of Yehuda says I can go into a store and put down money and take the object, where going to internet and I'm buying the knowledge of the internet. What's the difference?
Again, according to the Shevet HaLevi, he's claiming that the Noda Yehuda wants to know, is there a chayfetz be'en, a chayfetz mesuyam? That's
What's the lumdus of that? Tell me what's the difference between
again,
chayfetz
there's
be'en
no
or
riots
chayfetz
one way or the
mesuyam?
other, Bobby. I can't tell you what leads one to this decision or that decision. The Noda Yehuda should know that the Noda Yehuda was taken to task for this. We don't have riots here. There's a concept that's I call it amorphous. It's mysterious. It's hidden behind, layers and layers. It's almost, I don't want to use the word, misleading or ambiguous. There's some sort of concept called schar pa'ula on Shabbos. And the Yehuda said that as soon as you get to the point where there's an object that's being taken from you and being paid for, then the payment is in the object. It's not in the pa'ula, it's in the object.
I don't understand. Like, I understand why schirus doesn't work that way, because schirus, I'm using I'm renting it for Shabbos. I'm using it on Shabbos. That's really, the whole thing. I'm not talking about Havlah. I'm talking, I rent the house for Shabbos itself. That's a problem, because that's mamish char Shabbos. But here, whether I'm buying a chayfetz or whether I'm buying like information or knowledge, what's the difference?
Again, the Yehuda is saying, am I paying for an object or am I paying for the Shabbos? Shabbos is his man.
Knowledge is an object. Why is knowledge any different?
But again, Bob, the point here is that the object itself has inherent value. I'm not paying you for Shabbos. It happens to be that I purchased your soda pop on Shabbos, but I'm paying you for the object. I can deflect the hana, and I can say that my benefit is not a benefit from Shabbos, it's a benefit from the object. If the object would have been sold to us a different day. In the case of a rental on Shabbos, I'm enjoying the use during this period of time, during the 24 hours.
I'm not, I understand that. I'm saying the internet. I don't understand why you're making a difference between buying a chayfetz and buying on the internet.
No, because what I'm saying is, in the case of the internet, what I'm doing is I'm saying, give me your knowledge. I'm going to pay for your knowledge. Now, do you view that as a payment for the knowledge, or every time I use the internet and I gain that object, that knowledge, I am benefiting from the use? Let's say, for example, I don't know enough about the internet, but let's say I pay you for every minute that you use the internet. It's like a clock, a meter. I don't know if there is such a thing on the internet. Does anybody know if there's such a thing as, pay per minute or so?
Used to be.
I'll make the chiluk a little bit more, if you'll permit me, Berzon. I'll make the chiluk a little bit better, and David Spiegel will help me out with the computer side of it. But I could see where there's a difference if I'm downloading a document, for example. So I go to a website and I say I'm purchasing a document. I'm purchasing something from so that's mamish to me a chayfetz. Now, on the other hand, if I'm going to the site and I'm using the information on the site, then maybe you have an argument to say that I'm using it on Shabbos, and that's schar Shabbos. But I still don't.
So again, there are two definitions. One definition says that everything is awesome. It's all schar Shabbos. The only thing that's mutter is when you have a chayfetz. The other way of saying it is no, it's not schar Shabbos unless I'm paying you for Shabbos, for the use during that time period. And then there would be a difference between whether there's a meter that clicks and you pay per minute or not.
Could you say that something to do with Kinyan? I wouldn't know how it is, but the concept of Kinyan is very difficult with something which is not an object of substance. I don't know how we would define it here, but that's obviously the difference between knowledge and an object. How do you kona something that's actually not of substance?
Right. So he's saying, the Shevet HaLevi is arguing that the heter of the Nod B'Yehud is because I'm buying something of substance. Once I'm buying something of substance, I can sort of separate it from Shabbos. But in a case where I'm paying you for an ongoing pa'ula, and that pa'ula takes place on Shabbos, so your knowledge, the computer is kind of, it's like a foghorn that's sounding off your knowledge. So then I'm paying you for the ongoing knowledge that in this case I benefit from on Shabbos. Again, does it have anything to do with Shabbos? It's purely a coincidental overlap to Shabbos. But since I'm paying you for the use of your atar internet on Shabbos, and it's not an object that I can say, well, I bought an object, therefore the Shevet HaLevi says it's awesome. I would have gone the other way. I would have said that any time that you're innocent until proven guilty. In other words, you have to prove to me, like in the case of Stirus, that I am benefiting from Shabbos. That's awesome. The only thing is, we have to keep in mind that Schar Shabbos applies as an Isur even to a case of a Pa'ula, which could have been done theoretically on any day of the week. Okay. Now, if you have the other pages, and I thank David again, there are many, many pages. I think it starts from page 21, goes on to page 36. I'm going to select my favorite pages here from a Tshuva Sefer, which is called B'Mare HaBazak, or HaBezek, HaBazak, I think it is. First, I found it fascinating to describe a situation that goes on in Russia, in the area of Moscow. So we're on page 21. That's the first of this section.
Could I just mention something?
Yes, please, please.
I'm just quoting because Rose Silver gave a shir on this many years ago, and he said that with regards to the internet, I didn't do anything on Shabbos to make chalois. This is based on a Rabbi Kiva Eger.
Okay, look,
and I don't even know.
Entire shir on this. So it's up to you. You can either give me what Rav Silva said. I don't want to hear what Rav Silva said till I say what I said. And everything that you're talking about now is what I prepared for today's shir. So if you'll have Rachmanis and a little bit of emotional identification and compassion with a Jew, then you'll tell me what Rav Silva said. But everything that I prepared for today is all about what you're speaking about. Okay, then? Great.
Okay.
So those are the rules of the game. You remind me, I always tell the story, I must have told it to you a dozen times. In Rav Soloveitchik's here, somebody in the back of the room, as the Rav was developing his ideas, he raises his hand and he says, but Rab Aaron said. So the Rav bangs down on the table. He says, I don't care what Rab Aaron said. You listen to what I said. He said, Rebbe, I didn't mean Rab Aaron Kotler. I meant your brother, Rab Aaron Soloveitchik. Oh, what did he say? Okay. So here's what goes on in Russia. Ilay Plum. There are a couple of gatherings, clusterings of Jews that are spread out, and they're writing a tshuva. I mean, it's like heart-rending. They can't get a minyan together in any one of these shuls. Unless you think it's because of machlokes that they can't get together in one shul, which we know things like that, unfortunately, have happened. Also, Ladaber, Reb Levi Yitzchak, it's not going to last. But in this case of Russia, the different clusters of Jews are separated by 70 kilometers. And in each one of these groups, they get together 7 people, maybe 8 people. They can't get the 10th person. They just can't get it. You'll take a look if you ever get a chance. I don't know if you enjoy the Maccabees. I'm a big fan of the Maccabees. I love that stuff. So they have a beautiful song about a town that couldn't get together a minyan down south. They used to have a minyan, then people died, and very moving video. You can get it on YouTube. Anyway, so they're asking, should we keep these shuls going, or maybe we should close these shuls? Can we, in a case where we have 9 men, we have one young fellow who's less than bar mitzvah, can we give him a chumash and be mashlim him to a minyan? And they're asking for guidance. Now, if you'll take a look at footnote number 2, which quotes a sugya in Masechta Brachos, Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis Mem Ches Amud Aleph, and Rabbeinu Tam there, the Gemara offers the possibility in the context of Zimun that we could be mitzaref a katan to be mashlim a Zimun, and we could also perhaps be mashlim a zimun with an aron kodesh, even without a 10th person. In the course of this whole discussion in the sugya, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, "Afal pisha amru katan amutal barisa ein mizamnin olav." A young child could not be part of the zimun. Aval osim also snif la asar. Once we have 9, we can add a 10th. And Rabbeinu Tam makes 2 inroads here. Number 1, even though the Gemara at the end of this long sugya says, "Ein halacha right? Ein halacha kekol sugya." Well, what's the language here? Less hilchos kekol hanishmaitika. Nevertheless, says Rabbeinu Tam, that statement of the Gemara has nothing to do with Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and we can accept Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi la'aloch. Second inroad of Rabbi Tam, the halacha of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi applies not just to zimun, but also to tefillah. And therefore, the katan could be mashlim the asara or a minyan for daven, which means that we could say Baruch Hu, we could say Kaddish, and we could repeat the Shmon Esrei and say Kedusha. All that is created by a 10th who's a katan.
How define the katan? What age?
Okay. So now we take a look in Shulchan Aruch to see how we're going to flesh out the details of the katan who's number 10. Those poskim who accepted Rabbeinu Tam, you'll see on the bottom of page 21 in Shulchan Aruch, Arachaim Siman Nun Hey, and Yesh Matirim Lomar Dover Shebekdusha going on to page 22 in the footnote, Betisha V'tziruf Katan, Imu Yoser Miben Sheish, he's got to be a minimum of 6 years old. The Odea Lamisha Mispalalim, he understands that there's a God in heaven. And the Mechaber says, after quoting those who rely and accept Rabbeinu Tam, Lo Nirim Divrayim, we're not going to accept this, and we're not going to be mitzaref for Kot. Comes along the Ramah, and the Ramah writes, we're not going to accept a Katan, even if he's holding on to a Chumash. The Gemara raises the possibility that if he's holding on to a Chumash, then we somehow add A plus B equals C. He's a Katan, he's Yodel Amicha Mispalim, he's holding on to a Chumash. However, says the Ramah, Miu, Yesh Noagim Lahakel, and then he adds 2 words, Bishas Had. Now, this opens up an entire discussion. What is Shas HaDchak? In the case of these little hamlet Jewish communities in Russia, it's very fascinating to consider this Shas HaDchak, which is the thrust of what we're going to learn here with the tshuva of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and so forth and so on, because Shas HaDchak, as a general rule, means what we call a hora shah. There's something very, very pressing at this particular moment. Can we apply Shas HaDchak over and over and over again? I have my doubts. What we're going to see here is that in the case of those hamlets in Russia, we're going to say that if you have 9 and a child, that's called Shas HaDchak. You're going to give the child, if he's above the age of 6, he's Yodel Ami Mispal, and give him a Sefer Torah. Now, it doesn't mean that he has to hold the Sefer Torah. I'm not going to give a Sefer Torah to a 6-year-old to hold. We're going to put it down on the Shulchan, and he's going to hold on to the Eitz Chaim. And we're going to recite Kaddish and Kedusha and Baruch. The Mishnah Berurah says over there in Siman Nun Hey that Bismanenu nagim litzaref katan al yedei chumash biyada. Okay, he says that there's one Kaddish that he wants to leave out. That's the Kaddish after Olenu. Okay, that's a Torah unto itself. But fundamentally, even though he says many are machmir and they don't like being mitzaref and katan, but minig Yisrael Torah, I mean, I'm just adding that, and he says that there are those who are noig l'kuda. The thrust of this tshuva that we're learning here is that even though the Shulchan Aruch writes that we're not mitzaref to tefillah b'tzibur, anything less than asara gedolim will not cut the mustard, but nevertheless, b'shas adchak we can be mitzaref and cut. And he quotes the Aruch HaShulchan. You'll go through it on your own. I just wanted to point out something absolutely fascinating, in my humble opinion. On page 22, in the text of the tshuva that starts with the paragraph Nira, he writes the following. If you don't even have a havamina of 9 people and being mitzaref for katan, nevertheless, kedai lamshich ulispalel bebeis hakneses. What is a Beis HaKnesses, I ask, rhetorically, if not a makom for tefillah b'tzibur? Then he says that Kedushas Beis HaKnesses, again, I'm rewriting the text in my own logic. Kedushas Beis HaKnesses comes from a kinus, not necessarily a tzibur, a gathering of Jews to daven together, even without a chal shem tzibur, and generate a kedushas beis haknesses. I think Rabbosai, if I would tell this over to my Rebbe, he would laugh at me. Well, what do you mean? What kind of kedushas beis haknesses is here? Very emotional, but it's not halachic. And he quotes in the footnote a seif in Shulchan Aruch that speaks about the chashivas of davening in the Beis HaKnesses even without a tzibur. And there's no minyan. This could be relevant to Corona, by the way. You know, where let's say the authorities allow you up to 10 people, but not more, and you couldn't get the 10th. Nevertheless, the other 9 people are encouraged to daven in the Beis HaKnesses. That's explicit in the Shulchan Aruch. He quotes it in Orach Chaim Siman Tzad. But that's a horse of a different color. We still have a great gap to bridge over here, because we're not talking about a makom tefillah that's called Beis HaKnesses. If I were to interpret that Beis HaKnesses is a place where the tzibur davens, I couldn't use that definition to describe the hamlet in Russia, because that's not a place that's used by a tzibur. We never have a tzibur. And then he adds, "V'chein mishum she'ulai bi'asid yatzlichu lekavetz minyan." He has a practical consideration. Keep the shul going. Mashiach is around the corner. We're going to get a minyan. Now we don't have a minyan. Have faith. Keep the shul going. But his first argument is that to be Makayim Tefillah in this place, even in the absence of a tzibur, means to daven in a Beis HaKnesses. Because he quotes the Shulchan Aruch, who says that it's always advisable and recommended to daven in a Beis HaKnesses, even without a tzibur. But I wonder, and I'm thinking out loud with you, is this place called the Beis HaKnesses? He's redefining the word Knesses. Knesses doesn't mean a tzibur. Knesses is miloshen kinus. We gather together the people. Do we have a minyan? Hopefully, yes. We don't have a minyan? Okay, we're disappointed. But it still remains a Beis HaKnesses. And I suspect that if we take his logic to its conclusion, there are many different dinim now that are going to apply to that Beis HaKnesses. You know, are you allowed to use it as a compandria? Are you allowed to talk to Varim B'Teilim? And so forth and so on. because if you endow it with Kedushas Beis HaKnesses, that changes its status. And why is it Beis HaKnesses? Because there's a kinus of people getting together. Okay, then. Now, I'd like to take a look at pages 33 and 34. There's something called Hora'at Keva. You've all heard of it. I'm not sure how you translate it into Canadian English, but here in Hebrew, it's called Hora'at Keva. So I give instructions to the bank to pay my bills. And now the bank is going to pay my bills on Shabbos. And he describes a situation in September of 2010, which I think is the month that I arrived in Canada, if I'm not mistaken. And Yontif was on a Friday. Okay, I'm not sure that that's totally relevant to the tshuva, but apparently it was a very early Sukkot that year. That I remember as being very cold. I don't know if you can check that out. Anyway, so when it comes to Toronto, any time could be cold. I'll never forget, I told you this a million times, I came back from Eretz Yisrael after Pesach on May 1st. And I don't know, does that clock still exist there before Rabbi Strachler's shul? Right now, Hermes Bakery. They still have that red clock on top, or am I dating myself? Anyway, they used to have this digital red clock, and it would tell you the time and tell you the temperature. And I couldn't believe it. It was minus 15 or something. It was May. So I got out of the car and I started screaming, "This is obscene. Don't you realize it's May? We don't get freezing weather in May." Anyway, so to make a long story short, the issue was the banks have to pay all your, what do they call it? Your bills, right? That's the word I'm looking for. They have to pay your bills on September 1st because that's the day that your salary goes into the bank. So the arrangement that you have within the context of this Horas Keva is that the bank should pay your bills on the day that your salary comes in, which in this particular model was on September 1st, which was Yom Tov. And you cannot call up the bank and tell them to pay your bills on Erev Yom Tov because your salary is not yet in the bank. And those are the rules of the bank. They're not going to, I don't know, I guess every bank is different because some banks will lay out the money for you and they'll charge you interest. But in any event, this is the situation that's being described in the state of Jersey. Now, the question is this considered a kinyan that's effectuated on Shabbos? And he writes in the tshuva, Mutal Yehudi levakesh b'yom chol migoy. On Erev Shabbos, I can ask a guy to pay my bills, levatzei avuro havarat banka it, even though the transaction is going to take place on Yom Tov, on Shabbos. And the reason for that is because the bank has to pay your bills. They don't necessarily have to pay your bill on that day. The gas bill can be paid from the 1st of the month until the 15th of the month, etc. The electric bill. It's just that they won't pay your bills before the 1st of the month, but they have that leeway to pay during the entire time. So you are not instructing the bank to pay your bills on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. This is what we discussed earlier about Havlah. And the tshuva comes to the conclusion that this is mut. But he himself, in the footnote, in paragraph number 1 base, quotes Rabbi Kiva. That's the Rabbi Kiva that Rabbi Silva gave a shir on. I only know this from Yudi. And we want to discuss this Rabbi Kiva. Does Rabbi Kiva Eger apply to this issue? And I think it's going to have an impact on the internet that we discussed earlier. Rabbi Kiva Eger says the following. You're not allowed to do an action before Shabbos that will cause a kinyan to take place on Shabbos. I cannot set up a kinyan on Erev Shabbos when the kinyan will be chal, will be validated on Shabbos. And although the Mishnah and the Shulchan Aruch paskin that you could set up traps on Erev Shabbos and the animal will be trapped on Shabbos, nevertheless, when it comes to kinyanim, we have a special set of halachas that govern kinyanim, and the Isur now applies when you set up on Shabbos a kinyan, or in this case, a payment that's going to take place on Shabbos. Just 1 second, David, before I answer your question, I just want to make sure my brain is tuned in over here. He says, this is 1b line 5. He says, B'shut Rabbi Kiva Eger, Heisik she'asur lasos ma'aseh b'yom chol, shemikocho yigomer kinyan b'Shabbos. The afal gav gam eino oseh davar b'Shabbos atzma. He does not do anything on Shabbos. He just set into motion a process which will culminate on Shabbos with the kinyan. And he writes here in the next paragraph, Afal pichen, nira sheyesh lahakel b'mikra zeh. Which if I read this correctly, you'll judge me, you'll read it. He means that even Rabbi Kiva Eger would allow for a horat keva of a bank. Even though he instructed the bank, whenever he did, whenever he signed the horat keva, it's a contractual agreement, which if you read the fine print, you can ask your lawyer, it instructs the bank and authorizes them to do these kinyanim for you and transfer your money from your bank account on any day of the year, including Shabbos. And perhaps one could argue that Rabbi Kiva Eger is only talking about a case where he knows up front that the kinyan is going to end on Shabbos, which means although the Maisa kinyan took place on Erev Shabbos, the Chalosa kinyan, as we call it, will take place on Shabbos. That's not so in the case of the Horas Keva to the bank. However, again, you'll have to read the fine print here. We don't have that much time left. On page 34, you'll see an entire page of extensive notes. And every single note here is kedai. It's worthwhile. It's written very, very well. And he wants to be mekil according to Rabbi Kiva Eger, and Rabbi Kiva Eger will concede that the case of Horas Keva is mutter, regardless of Havlah, even if the instruction to the bank would specify Shabbos, Saturday. In other words, he would sign a document that on Saturday, the 1st of September, as soon as my salary comes into the bank, I want you to pay the bills for my electricity, for my water, and for the rubbish collection. Rabbi Kiva Eger would be mine. So again, we're going to leave one issue on the side now. Is he instructing specifically that the bank should transfer his monies on Shabbos? Or is this included in the whole year? That's issue number one. However, he says regardless of that, Rabbi Kiva Eger would be mad. Why? according to his analysis here, and again, it's a chabura of Talmidei Chacham. He doesn't tell you, he doesn't name anyone. Rabbi Akiva Eiger is talking about a Maisa that culminates in a chalos. If we reframe it, the chalos kinyan is now related to a Maisa kinyan. And even though that Maisa kinyan took place and was implemented on Erev Shabbos, the chalos kinyan will, in a sense, activate on Shabbos the Maisa kinyan of Erev Shabbos. I'll give you an example of what I think he has in mind, although he doesn't mention this sugya. Here. So what it means is I put a pot of food on Erev Shabbos in an open fire, and it will cook on Shabbos. And the Chachamim prohibited it. Machlokas Beisol Beit Shammai, but it's awesome. Why is it awesome? Because the bishul took place on Shabbos and it's related to the Hanochas Hatavshil al Gabi Ha'esh. Are you following me? And now the question is, when the guy, in this case, does the transaction, meaning that someone in the bank who is pressing the right buttons and paying Yankel's bills for his water and electricity, can that be considered a violation of Rabbi Akiva Eiger's Isur of setting up a Maisa on Erev Shabbos, the chalos of which takes place on Shabbos? And he says, no, this is not Rabbi Akiva Eiger, because it's the guy who does the Maisa of transferring your funds to the to Con Ed or whatever it is. Abosa, are you listening? It's the guy who's doing it all. Rabbi Akiva Eiger is talking about a case where the Jew sets up the kinyan before Shabbos. And the magic of Rabbi Akiva Eiger is that the ultimate kinyan that took place on Shabbos is related to your Maisa. And included, inherent in the chalos is your Maisa, but not in the case of instructing the bank to pay your bills. That means you signed a contract called a Ras Kevin. You gave the authority and the power over to the bank to pay your bills, but it's the bank that's paying your bills. The Maisa Malacha is being implemented by the Goyim who are working the bank. And he says, if you take a look on page 34, again, it's going to be a little difficult for me without screen sharing too, but if you have page 34, about halfway through the page, there's a paragraph that starts Nimtza, where he summarizes his analysis, which on line number 4 earlier, he said, Dafka ima Yehudi mevatzea es maisa kinyan, and therefore the Yehudi in Rabbi Akiva Eiger's scenario is the gorem of the kinyan li gomer b'Shabbos. Here, Rabbi Akiva Eiger Yoder, that's in the middle of paragraph, the end of paragraph Nimtza, if you can find it's like the 3rd paragraph, 4th paragraph down. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger Yoder means he'll conceive, Shema kinyan mitbatzea al yidei hagoy ein isur. Now, if we accept this, again, I have okay, very quickly, I'll tell you, before we get back to the internet question that we studied before, I'll tell you what my problem here, why am I uncomfortable? If you accept Rabbi Akiva Eiger, I'm uncomfortable. Number one, signing authority to the bank might itself be considered a Maisa that ultimately leads to a kinyan. Number two, I have another problem here. Because when we give the model of Shehiyah on Shabbos, the Gemara says that for those who are Mekil on Shehiyah, which means I place my pot on the fire on Erev Shabbos, it cooks on Shabbos. The Gemara calls it, I don't have a Gemara Shabbos here, but if you could open up to Daf, I think it's Lamed Tes and Parakira, the Gemara calls it Shevi Altas, which means that the ultimate malacha of Bishul happened me'elav. Me'elav means that the fire heats up the food in the pot. Not so in the case of the bank. In the case of the bank, you can't compare it to Shehiyah, even if you make it with Shehiyah, because of Shevi Altasa, because it's passive. This is not a passive case. And just to, to dramatize my point, why is the guy in TD Bank transferring my funds to Con Ed? The answer is because he's my shliach. I have appointed the bank as my proxy to implement my action. Rabbi Akiva Eiger would only allow it in one of two scenarios, either where it was Shevi Al Taseh and the kinyan was effectuated without any action whatsoever, like Dumya de Shehiyah, or alternatively, where the guy is operating on his own behalf, which is called Adaite de Nafsheka of it. But if he's doing it because of my instruction, he is just the extended arm of the Jew who owns the bank account. That might come under the Isser of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. I would not be so quick to assume that Rabbi Akiva Eiger would be moded that this is mutter. And therefore, if we go back for a moment to the Shevet HaLevi in the case of the internet, where the guy is now paying me for using my internet site, in such a case, I would argue that even Rabbi Akiva Eiger would be matter. And there's room to be makil straight across the board, because what's happening here is that the information, one second, maybe I'm not right. Just give me a second. Any information that's gathered here by John Paul Jones, this is not Rabbi Akiva Eiger. This is not a malacha or a Maisa Kinyan that was set up by the Jew on Erev Shabbos, although the Jew gave that information on Erev Shabbos in creating the internet site. The guy is completely on his own, independently doing whatever malacha he has to do to turn on his electric computer and to whatever might be involved. All that is being done by the guy. And on whose behalf is he doing it? He's not doing it on behalf of the Jew. He's doing it on his own behalf. That's a clear-cut application of the rule of Goy Adaite de Nafsheka. And therefore, when Rabbi Akiva Eiger talks about Hilchos Kinyanim, and he postulates that even though the kinyan took place on Shabbos without the Jews' active Maisa kinyan, it's still asur, and it could very well be that Rabbi Akiva Eiger would say that the guy is operating on behalf of the Jew, even if it's the guy who implements the malach and the kinyan. That might be asur, but that's only because the guy is operating on behalf of the Jew. And therefore, I have a suspicion, I can't prove this, that Rabbi Akiva Eiger, if he was alive today, he would prohibit the bank situation. I'm sorry, scratch it. He would say, oh, yeah, I got it right. I'm sorry. When I get pressured when I know I'm going overtime. Well, he might prohibit it. Why? Because the guy is not adaiti de nafsheka of him. He's not making any decisions. He was instructed clearly that when the salary comes in, you pay the bills. He is operating totally from A to Z on behalf of the Baal HaAccount. And Rabbi Akiva Eiger might say that is equal to a Jew setting up a kinyan that's going to take place without his active Maisa Kinyan. When he set it up on Erev Shabbos and it happens on Shabbos, Rabbi Akiva Eiger says it's your Kinyan. And perhaps that would apply, according to Rabbi Akiva Eiger, in a case where I set up a guy to do the Kinyan. I would even go further. Let's say I would, the word I'm looking for, program a monkey to make a Kinyan on my behalf on Shabbos. So on Sunday or on Friday, my, what's it called, George, my curious George, monkey, I program him to make a Kinyan for me. Of course, he'll steal all the money because he's so curious. But if he doesn't, Rabbi Akiva Eiger might prohibit that. Because although the Jew is totally passive, but by instructing the animal, or Abdul Gadi, to do the Kinyan on his behalf, that comes under a Kinyan that was Nigram al Yidei Yisrael. But if I open an internet site, Rabbi Akiva Eiger would be matter because the guy decides when and how he's going to benefit from my site. The only problem is Schar Shabbos. So as far as Kinyanim are concerned, Lufiani is Daiti, and you'll tell me what Rav Silva said about it, I would say that even Rabbi Akiva Eiger would be matter. Why? Because this is not a Kinyan that you could relate back to the Yisrael. The guy going on your internet site is making a Kinyan on his own behalf, not on behalf of the Jew. Rabbi Akiva Eiger could very likely be machmir in the case of the bank, and we have to find a solution for the case of the bank of Horas Keva, maybe Avlo. But in the case of the internet, where the guy is buying my knowledge for himself, and I'm totally passive, Rabbi Akiva Eiger would be matter. That doesn't answer the issue of the Shevet HaLev. And that is, does this come under the Iser of Netilas Schar U'ula B'Shabbos? Because he's not buying an object, he is paying you for your knowledge. And everything might be asur under Netilas Schar Shabbos, says the Noda B'Yehuda, unless there's a chayfetz misuyam. And in this case, where I'm paying you for information, that's not a chayfetz misuyam. Hence, it falls back into the general rubric, the bag of apples, which is called Netilas Schar. Now I'm ready for Rav Silva. What did Rav Silva say? I hope I said the same thing that he said. I hope. You'll have to unmute yourself, but I gave you.
Yeah, it is. It is what he said. Yeah, he said because.
See, I get a lot more geschmack if I could say it before I hear what he says.
He said that.
You forget what Ramar said. Yeah.
He was saying, just to quote his words, that I didn't do anything on Shabbos to make this halais. I don't even know the person buying the object on the internet. Right. On the internet, I don't even know the person. And he said after that Rabbi Akiva Eiger also seems not to be sure about it.
Oh,
but the whole quote from Rabbi Akiva Eiger, he said that he feels that he wasn't sure about this.
Right.
So
yeah, that you'll see here in these massive footnotes here. I was assuming that Rabbi Akiva Eiger, Paskind, and La Halacha, the poskim, all say, including Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, that we should be machmir if all things are equal for Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Sadchak, maybe we can rely on those who disagree with Rabbi Akiva Eiger, or like you say, maybe Rabbi Akiva Eiger himself is not 100% sure. So on both sides, we have to go now. I'll answer your question, David. I just want to say this. If you have these pages, and David, I want you to tune in on this, what we skipped, which I'd love to cover with you on our next meeting, are pages 29 and 30 about Avelis on Shabbos during Shiva, very interesting. 31 to 32, which is a case of somebody who owns a geschäft. He speaks about a college. You're an owner of a college. You pay salaries to your staff, all your professors and your instructors. Are you allowed to keep that college open on Shabbos? Is that an issue of Schar Shabbos? And then this is up to you guys. And I don't want to get in trouble because he's got on pages 20, 28. I'm sorry, pages 23, 24, the issue of a woman as president of a shul.
Oh, that's a good one.
And of course, the Shiloh comes from Florida. If you've spent any time in Florida, you'll know exactly what I have in mind. So I don't know if we want to touch that hot topic, but basically, we have a lot of good material here that we haven't even touched upon. There's also on pages 25 to 27 a discussion about how many times a day should a woman daven and what parts of davening should she recite. And again, it's not related to Corona in any sense, but I think it's something that we should all learn. Now, there's some fascinating tshuvas here, starting on pages 35, which you have, and going to page 37. And this has to do with creating a certain bicycle, a Shabbos bicycle, and also riding to shul on Shabbos by a guy. If a guy could drive you to shul on Shabbos, so you can't get there on your own. Again, I was surprised that this Shaila came from Ecuador. I thought it came for sure from Florida, because in those have any of you, again, you're Canadian, so have you ever heard of Century Village? Yeah. So they have, again, there are thousands upon thousands of residents. It's a massive place. But they have a beautiful Orthodox shul there, and the owners of the complex have a bus that travels and stops every few blocks at a stop and goes around this. And it's not called Century Village. I forgot the name of it right now. Anyway,
Century Village.
Is that what it's called?
There's one that's called Century Village.
Century Village. The rabbi, if it's the same place, is called Wygoda. So you can check it out. If it's the same place, I was a scholar in residence there for Yom Ha'atzmaut a few years back. And he told me that they have a heter, I'll tell you from who, for the older people to get to shul on Shabbos to ride on the bus. It has to do with a few conditions. Number one, the bus travels, whether there's people on the bus or not on the bus. It stops and it starts. A whole bunch of conditions.
It's like a Shabbos elevator.
Excellent. So that's the question. Is it like a Shabbos elevator? Now, for me to give a share on the Shabbos elevator, you'd have to pay me a year's salary. Literally. It is the most complicated issue. In fact, if you take a look at the RJJ Journal, Halacha in Contemporary Society, I forgot who wrote the article right now, it escapes my mind, on the elevator on Shabbos. It is 50 pages long. Most of it is physics, not for me. So I wouldn't touch the elevator on Shabbos with a 10-foot pole. For me, it's okay if you want to use an elevator on Shabbos, it has a hechsher of I don't know what. I don't like this business where they set up an elevator in a religious neighborhood, and they don't write, who was the rabbinic supervision, because it's so complicated. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent. So these are some of the issues that I'd like to discuss. Now, I would go back to Corona if I had access to the sefer called Chamuri Doniya, because it's an excellent sefer and I enjoyed it very much. You may remember we discussed the question of a woman going into the ocean instead of the mikvah, because she's afraid to go to the mikvah, and many, many other shilas. But, David's been sending me, pieces, but I can't see them, I can't read them, it's just too complicated. So in the meantime, this is what I picked up. If you'll give me fingers up, this is a successful experiment, and we can continue next week with some of these truths.
Yeah.
Okay then? All right.
Can I say something first?
Yes, please, David.
Okay, so the bank situation is the Shah is discussing in the Israeli safer, right? I would say here in Canada, it should be mutter for two reasons. number one, there's no actual Kenyan when you electronically transfer money to anybody, no matter who's doing it. It's all, you're transferring electrons. There's no chayfetz. You're actually making a Kenyan on. That's number one. And number two, with a PAC, which is attributes in Hebrew, here in Catskill PAC, they don't always take it the day they're supposed to. Sometimes it's the day later, right? So to say it's Meiser Shabbos is not necessarily true. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. So for those two reasons, it's 100% Muslim.
To support David Nayach, I was going to say that it's very similar to the case of giving, the famous case, you give laundry to a guy, right? To do your laundry, as long as he has time to do it, before or after Shabbos, and he doesn't commit, it's literally Shabbos. Here, like
Not time urgent.
You're not
He makes the decision.
makbid. You're not makbid. You may have given instructions that it should be on September the 1st, but you're not makbid that it should be that day. If it's Shabbos, you're happy if it's the next day also. And like David says, the banks don't often execute when they say they're going to execute anyway. It happens the next day. So I would say that it's, mitzad havla, or whatever the terminology is for that, where the guy can, you're contracting him to do something, but he doesn't have to do it on Shabbos.
Right. But as far as your issue, David, about whether it's a Kenyan, I'm pretty sure the poskim assume it is a Kenyan. Even when you move things around on the computer and transfer money from one bank account to the other, the poskim seem to assume that's a Kenyan.
Yeah, but there's no Hadbar Mashiach. What kind of Kenyan is
There's
it?
the Kenyan, yeah.
I don't know. It could be, I'd have to research this further, that's called a Kenyan simtuta. Simtuta means a Kenyan which is agreed upon by the society. Like, you know what I mean by Mazel Bracha, in the Bursa, that kind of thing.
Okay.
It could have come under Kenyan Sudar. I mean, again, Kenyan is massive, but the poskim do seem to assume that transferring money from one bank account to another is a Kenyan.
Okay.
And if you would go into the bank on Shabbos and instruct them, that would certainly, according to everyone, be prohibited. Okay, then? Okay, thank you so much. Shkach. Have a great day, everyone.